$5. That's what the small hand clutched inside a worn envelope as the 9-year-old girl stood at the edge of Bayfront Park, her gaze fixed on the man everyone in Sarasota feared. She knew his reputation from whispered conversations, knew he wasn't someone a child should approach. The air hung heavy with salt and humidity as the sunset painted the Gulf waters orange and gold, casting long shadows across the park's winding paths. Children played in the distance, their laughter carried away by the gentle breeze that rustled through palm fronds. Gino Falcone sat alone on an iron bench, his dark suit impeccable despite the Florida heat, his presence commanding even in stillness. No bodyguard stood nearby, yet something invisible seemed to protect the space around him from intrusion, as if the very air recognized his authority. Find the weakness and exploit it, he had taught his men countless times, a philosophy that built his empire from nothing. Today, ironically, he was the one exposed, a rare moment of solitude that he allowed himself only once each month, away from the demands of his position and the weight of decisions that determined fates. A flock of seagulls circled overhead, their cries punctuating the tranquil scene as families gathered their belongings to head home before sunset. Gino checked his watch, an understated platinum timepiece worth more than most people's cars, and calculated how much longer he could indulge in this rare moment of anonymity. The park had become his sanctuary over the years, a neutral territory where the constant chess game of power and control temporarily paused. Here, surrounded by ordinary lives unfolding in predictable patterns, he could almost remember the man he might have become in another lifetime. He watched an elderly couple feed breadcrumbs to demanding ducks, their comfortable silence speaking of decades spent together, a simple pleasure his lifestyle had never permitted. The momentary melancholy this observation triggered was interrupted by the sight of a small figure hovering uncertainly at the edge of his peripheral vision. Time seemed to slow as Annie Brooks gathered her courage, fingers tightening around her precious envelope, the $5 inside representing weeks of saved lunch money. Her worn shoes carried her forward with halting steps, each one requiring more bravery than she thought she possessed. The seasoned crime boss had faced armed men without blinking, had stared down federal agents with a smile, yet something in this child's direct gaze unsettled him. Perhaps it was the absence of fear where fear should rightfully exist, or the quiet determination that seemed far beyond her years. Gino noticed the child immediately, his sharp eyes missing nothing even in moments of apparent calm. Something in her determined approach made him pause his thoughts about business matters awaiting his attention back at headquarters. The girl's appearance told its own story, the faded dress that had seen too many washes, the bruise barely visible beneath her hairline, the eyes that carried knowledge no child should possess. She stopped precisely 3 feet from his bench, maintaining a cautious distance. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the slight tremble in her hands. "Are you Mr. Falcone?" The question hung between them, bold and dangerous in the humid evening air. He considered denying it, sending her away with a cold word as he would most strangers foolish enough to approach him. Instead, curiosity overtook caution, and he inclined his head slightly, a gesture that neither confirmed nor denied, but somehow invited her to continue despite his better judgment. Annie stepped closer then, extending both hands with the envelope pinched between small fingers. "I need help, sir," she stated simply, no tears or dramatics coloring her request. "And I can pay." The absurdity of this child offering payment almost made his lips twitch with something like amusement, but the gravity in her eyes stopped any smile before it could form. Whatever brought her here was no trivial matter. That much was clear from the tension in her small shoulders. A distant church bell tolled 6 times, marking the hour as seagulls circled overhead, their cries punctuating the moment between the powerful man and the determined child. The contrast between them couldn't be more stark, darkness and innocence facing off across an impossible divide. "What kind of help costs $5? He asked finally, his deep voice pitched low enough that only she could hear it. The question wasn't mocking, but genuinely curious, as if her answer might contain some profound wisdom he hadn't yet encountered. Her fingers tightened momentarily on the envelope before she held it out again, her chin lifting slightly in a gesture of pride that reminded him of himself decades ago. "It's all I have," she said simply, "but I think it's enough for what I need." With an expertise born from years of reading people, Gino accepted the envelope, noting the care with which it had been sealed, each crease pressed flat, corners aligned perfectly. The precision spoke of desperation, of something precious contained within flimsy paper. Annie watched him open it with the intensity of someone whose entire future hung in the balance, her small chest barely moving as she held her breath. Inside lay a carefully folded $5 bill and a note written in the careful hand of a child trying to appear grown up. The handwriting wobbled in places, revealing the effort it took to form each letter. Please make my uncle go away. He hurts my mom and my sister. We can't tell anyone because he says he'll take us away from Mom forever. The simplicity of the request landed like a brick on Gino's chest, momentarily stealing the air from his lungs as his eyes traveled from the note to the girl's face. In his world, problems were solved with calculated violence and strategic threats. Clean, efficient, emotionless. But this child's plea sparked something he thought long dead. "How did you find me?" he asked, his tone softer than before, curiosity mixing with something that might have been concern in another man. The question was important. Children shouldn't know how to locate men like him. Annie's gaze didn't waver as she answered. "I heard my uncle talking about you on the phone once. He said everyone's afraid of Mr. Falcone, even the police." Her small hands twisted together in front of her. "I thought maybe he'd be afraid of you too." The brutal honesty of her logic was flawless in its childish simplicity. Find the biggest predator to scare away the one hunting you. Gino felt a grudging respect for the girl's resourcefulness, mixed with something darker at the thought of what drove her to such measures. "Your mother doesn't know you're here," he stated rather than asked, already knowing the answer from the secretive way the girl glanced over her shoulder. Children with permission didn't clutch envelopes like lifelines or approach strangers with such careful planning. Annie shook her head, confirming his assumption with a small frown that aged her young face. "Mom takes medicine that makes her sleep a lot. My sister's only 4. She's too little to help." A jogger passed by, slowing briefly to glance at the unusual tableau they created. The imposing man in an expensive suit, and the small girl standing before him like a supplicant. Gino's sharp gaze flicked toward the intrusion, his expression hardening just enough to send the curious onlooker hurrying along the path without a backward glance. Annie seemed oblivious to this exchange, her focus entirely on communicating the gravity of her situation without breaking into tears. The discipline this required from a 9-year-old struck Gino as both admirable and deeply troubling. Children should cry when afraid, should seek comfort rather than solutions. The park's sprinkler system suddenly activated in a distant section, sending other visitors scrambling with surprised laughter as water arced through the golden evening light. Neither Gino nor Annie reacted to the commotion, locked in their private negotiation that transcended the ordinary world continuing around them. The unspoken burden in those simple words, the responsibility this child had assumed, stirred something protective in the crime boss that surprised even him. Children in his world were sacred, untouchable even in the harshest business dealings, and those who violated that code rarely lived to regret it. "Where is your uncle now?" Gino asked, his tone casual, but his eyes calculating, already mentally shifting resources to gather information. Background checks would be run, surveillance established, weaknesses identified, the machinery of his organization spinning into motion from a simple question. Annie pointed vaguely toward the north, where modest apartments rose beyond the park's borders. "At work till 7. He drives trucks." The information was delivered with the clinical detachment of a child who had learned to track an adult's movements as a matter of survival. Gino folded the note carefully, sliding it into his inner pocket rather than returning it with the money. The evidence would be destroyed later, but for now, it felt important to keep this tangible proof of trust, this contract written in a child's desperate hand. "Keep your money," he said, placing the $5 bill back in her small palm, closing her fingers around it with a gentleness few ever witnessed from him. "You've already paid enough." The girl looked confused, brows drawing together as she tried to understand if this meant he wouldn't help after all. "But don't you need payment?" she asked, logic and desperation warring in her young voice. "Some things aren't about money," Gino replied, surprising himself with the sincerity behind words he'd never expected to say. In his world, everything had a price, but staring into the hopeful eyes of this child, he recognized some debts couldn't be measured in dollars. Annie's shoulders relaxed slightly, the first sign that the armor she'd been wearing might be cracking. "Will you help us?" And she asked directly. No manipulation or tears, just the straight question of a child who had learned that adults rarely did what they promised. Gino nodded once, a barely perceptible movement that carried the weight of absolute certainty. In that moment, a contract more binding than any legal document was formed between the unlikely pair, the crime boss, and the desperate child who had sought him out. "I need to know where you live," he he said quietly, pulling a business card from his wallet and flipping it over to reveal a blank side. He extended it along with an expensive pen that cost more than most families' monthly grocery bill. Annie hesitated only briefly before taking the pen, her small hand steadier now as she carefully printed her address in the same neat handwriting from the note. The trust implicit in this action wasn't lost on Gino, who recognized the courage it required. "My uncle's name is Warren Brooks," she added, unprompted, as she handed back the card. The clinical way she offered this information revealed how completely she had committed to this path, burning bridges she was too young to fully understand. Gino studied the address, memorizing it instantly before tucking the card away alongside the note. His mind had already begun formulating plans, weighing options and consequences with the precision that had made him both feared and respected throughout Florida. "Go home now," he instructed, his tone gentle but firm. "Act normally. Don't mention meeting me to anyone. Not your mother, not your sister, not friends at school." The warning wasn't a threat but a protection, though few would believe the notorious Gino Falcone capable of such concern. Annie nodded solemnly, understanding passing between them without need for elaboration. She had approached a dangerous man and set dangerous things in motion. Even at 9, she comprehended the gravity of what she'd done. "How will I know when it's finished?" she asked pragmatically, a question that revealed how her young mind had already considered the aftermath. This wasn't a child seeking a fairy godmother, but a strategist securing confirmation of mission completion. The question earned her a rare, genuine smile from the crime boss, appreciation flickering across his usually impassive features. "You'll know," he promised simply, knowing that in his world, such assurances were absolute. Annie held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for deceit and finding none. With a small nod that mirrored his own, she turned and walked away, her steps lighter now despite the weight of her disclosure, her faith placed entirely in the hands of a man others feared to look in the eye. Gino watched until she disappeared around the bend in the park path, her small figure eventually blending with other children heading home for dinner. Only when she was completely out of sight did he pull out his phone and press a single button. "Paolo, I need information," he said without preamble when the call connected. "Warren Brooks, truck driver, lives at the address I'm texting you. Everything. Work schedule, finances, police record, associates." The orders flowed with practiced ease, setting in motion a machine built over decades. Paolo asked no questions. None were needed when Gino used that particular tone. Immediate priority came the only clarification. Code for how quickly resources should be diverted to this task over other pressing matters in the organization. "Highest," Gino replied without hesitation, ending the call and returning the phone to his pocket. The sun had nearly disappeared now, casting long shadows across the park as families gathered their children and headed home to safe, normal lives. Back in his office overlooking Sarasota Bay, Gino studied the files Paolo had compiled with remarkable efficiency. Warren Brooks, 3 prior domestic disturbance calls, no charges filed, a gambling debt to some minor players across town, and a drinking problem poorly hidden beneath a veneer of respectability. The photographs told the story the police reports didn't capture, a home where tension lingered in every corner, where a sickly woman tried to shield her daughters from a man whose frustration manifested in tightly controlled rage. The surveillance team had captured it all through telephoto lenses and carefully placed microphones. "He keeps them locked in when he's gone," reported Bobby Westwood, Gino's most trusted security specialist. "Mother's got some kind of autoimmune condition. Medication keeps her sleeping half the day. Insurance barely covers treatments." The clinical assessment continued with the precision Gino demanded of his team. The uncle's schedule, his habits, his weaknesses, all laid out like pieces on a chessboard. What remained was simply to decide which move would bring the most definitive conclusion. Gino's finger tapped thoughtfully on the glossy photograph of Warren Brooks, a man who radiated the particular blend of insecurity and cruelty he'd seen countless times in those who preyed on the vulnerable. This wasn't a respected enemy deserving of consideration, but a common predator hiding behind family ties. "Options," he said simply, the single word launching his top lieutenants into the discussion they'd been prepared for since the first call. They understood the parameters without explanation. The solution must be permanent, but create minimal attention. Frank DeMera, his consigliere for 15 years, laid out 3 scenarios with the efficiency of a military strategist. Disappearance is cleanest. Fishing accident off the Keys. Alternatively, a job opportunity out of state that he takes suddenly. Third option is a staged robbery gone wrong. The room fell silent as Gino considered, his expression giving nothing away to the men who had served him through decades of business, both legitimate and otherwise. They waited with practiced patience, knowing his decision would be final, and their execution of it would be expected to be flawless. "Not the robbery," he said finally, rejecting the violence of the option with surprising firmness. "Nothing that brings police to their door. The child has seen enough trauma." The protective note in his voice raised eyebrows among his inner circle, though none would dare comment. Bobby shifted slightly, a subtle signal that he had additional information to offer. At Gino's nod, he continued, "Brooks has a meeting tomorrow night with his bookie. Owes $15,000 he doesn't have. Could be leveraged." The pieces aligned in Gino's mind like a perfect symphony reaching its crescendo. Debt, opportunity, and a man desperate enough to make poor choices. The plan formed fully realized, elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its completeness. "Buy the debt," he instructed, his decision crystallizing into action. "Then offer him a way out, a delivery job that pays enough to clear what he owes. One-time opportunity, tonight only, no questions asked." Frank understood immediately, nodding as he made notes on his tablet. "The Canadian route?" he asked, referring to a particular operation they'd used before, when someone needed to disappear permanently across international borders. Gino's eyes hardened as he shook his head once, dismissing the option that might leave loose ends. "No, the warehouse job. Make sure Cruz handles the intake. Brooks doesn't leave the building." The order was delivered without emotion, a business decision no different from any other. Bobby tapped a few keys on his laptop, nodding as information populated his screen. "His truck route ends at 8 p.m. We can intercept him at the depot, make the offer before he heads home. Everything can be wrapped by midnight." With silent efficiency, the machine that Gino had built over decades hummed into action around him. Men dispersed to handle their assigned tasks, some to secure the warehouse, others to purchase the debt, a few to ensure that Warren Brooks's digital footprint would suggest he'd been planning to leave town for weeks. The night settled over Sarasota like a velvet cloak, stars appearing one by one as streetlights flickered on along the waterfront. In his penthouse office, Gino sipped 12-year-old scotch and waited for confirmation that each piece of his plan had fallen into place. "Brooks took the bait," Frank reported at 9:17 p.m., his voice calm through the secure line. "Heading to the warehouse now with Cruz. Thinks he's picking up high-value electronics for a quick 10,000 plus debt forgiveness." Gino acknowledged with a wordless sound, ending the call and returning to the window where the city lights reflected off the dark water of the bay. He rarely participated directly in such operations anymore. His position demanded separation from the day-to-day mechanics of enforcement. Yet tonight felt different, personal in a way that business rarely did. The image of Annie's determined face kept returning to him, reminding him of another child long ago who had needed protection and found none. At 11:42 p.m., his phone buzzed with a simple text, "Delivery completed." The understated confirmation that Warren Brooks had met his end came with attached instructions for handling the truck, the body, and the narrative that would be left behind. By morning, the official story would be simple and believable. Warren Brooks, faced with mounting gambling debts and threats from loan sharks, had abandoned his family and fled the state. His truck would be found at the bus station, ticket stub to Atlanta in the garbage can nearby. The police would make perfunctory inquiries, but with his history of domestic disturbances and financial troubles, few would question his disappearance. Those who might press harder would find themselves subtly discouraged by the invisible influence Gino maintained within local law enforcement. What remained was the matter of Annie, her sister, and their ailing mother, loose ends that in any other situation would be monitored briefly, then forgotten once the primary objective was achieved. But Gino found himself unable to simply walk away from their story. "Pull together a complete medical file on Catherine Brooks," he instructed Paolo the following morning, surprising his assistant with this unusual request. "I want to know exactly what condition she has, what treatments are available, and what they cost." The information arrived within hours. Multiple sclerosis, progressive but treatable with newer medications that insurance companies classified as experimental and refused to cover. The monthly cost of effective treatment exceeded what Catherine could possibly afford on disability payments. Gino made 3 calls that afternoon, one to the director of Sarasota Memorial Hospital's neurology department, another to his most discreet real estate agent, and a third to his financial manager. Money flowed through carefully obscured channels, setting events in motion that would reshape 3 lives. Annie noticed the changes gradually at first. Her mother seemed more alert in the mornings, new medications appearing in their bathroom cabinet with labels from a specialty pharmacy. The locks her uncle had installed mysteriously malfunctioned, then disappeared altogether during a maintenance visit. The apartment manager stopped by personally to inform Catherine Brooks that a renovation project required relocating them temporarily to a ground-floor 2-bedroom in the building's newly renovated East Wing. The temporary accommodation was twice the size of their original unit, with wide doorways that could easily accommodate a wheelchair if needed. When Catherine questioned the unexpected upgrade, confusion evident in her tired eyes, the manager mentioned only a computer error in their favor, and suggested they accept before someone higher up noticed the mistake. The lower rent, adjusted due to ongoing construction noise, was recorded in a new lease signed with shaking hands. 2 weeks after Warren's disappearance, a letter arrived from a prestigious law firm explaining that Catherine had been approved for a medical research program, fully funding her treatment for 5 years. The only requirement: regular appointments with specialists who would monitor her response to the new medication protocol. Annie watched her mother's face transform as she read the letter, hope replacing resignation for the first time in years. Something tight and vigilant in the child's posture loosened slightly, though her eyes still carried the wariness of someone who expected good fortune to be snatched away at any moment. On a crisp Monday morning, a sleek black town car pulled up outside their new apartment, the driver holding a sign with Catherine Brooks, Neurology Center, printed in professional lettering. Her mother hesitated at the unexpected luxury, but the driver simply explained that transportation was included in the research program. The neurologist who greeted them at the private medical center spoke with kind authority about promising new treatments, explaining complex medical terms with patience, while a nurse entertained Annie's little sister with coloring books in the corner. No one rushed them, or treated Catherine with the dismissive tone she'd grown accustomed to from overworked clinic doctors. "We've reviewed your case extensively, Mrs. Brooks," Dr. Harrington explained, her warm voice instilling confidence. "The inflammation markers in your last blood work suggest you'll respond exceptionally well to our newest protocol. Many patients have seen significant reversal of symptoms." Annie sat quietly beside her mother, absorbing every word while appearing to focus on a magazine in her lap. She had become expert at being simultaneously present and invisible, a skill developed through years of navigating her uncle's unpredictable moods. When the doctor stepped out briefly to retrieve test results, Catherine turned to her daughter with tears shimmering in her eyes. "I don't understand what's happening," she whispered, hope and confusion battling across her features. Why would they choose me for this program? The question hung between them, unanswerable in any way that wouldn't reveal Annie's desperate gamble 3 weeks earlier. The child simply squeezed her mother's hand and offered a small smile that seemed far too wise for her 9 years. Catherine's improvement began within days of starting the new medication. Subtle at first, then unmistakable as weeks passed. She could stand longer without fatigue, her hands steady enough to braid her younger daughter's hair, her mind clear of the fog that had kept her trapped between consciousness and sleep. The world expanded around them with each small victory. A trip to the beach where Catherine sat watching her daughters build sandcastles, a parent-teacher conference Annie didn't have to attend alone, meals prepared by steadier hands that brought them together around the table, rather than eating in exhausted shifts. No one mentioned Warren's absence except during a single brief visit from a disinterested detective, who seemed satisfied with Catherine's honest confusion about her brother-in-law's sudden departure. The case file was marked low priority, and eventually shelved among thousands of other voluntary missing persons. On the first day of spring, exactly 2 months after Warren disappeared, Annie was walking home from school when a familiar black car pulled alongside the curb. The window lowered silently, revealing Gino Falcone's impassive face, watching her with that same intense scrutiny from their first meeting. "May I speak with you a moment?" he asked, the polite request incongruous coming from a man of his reputation and position. He made no move to open the door, giving her the choice to approach or continue walking. Annie hesitated only briefly before stepping closer to the car, her school backpack clutched against her chest like a shield. Despite everything that had happened, the miraculous improvements in their lives, she had never expected to see him again. "Your mother is doing better," he stated, rather than asked, his eyes studying her face for confirmation. The genuine interest in his tone suggested this information mattered to him personally, not merely as confirmation of a completed transaction. Annie nodded, caution warring with the gratitude she couldn't express directly. "The doctors say she might be able to work part-time soon," she offered, the words carrying the weight of a miracle in their simple declaration. Gino nodded once, satisfaction briefly softening his features before he resumed his customary blank expression. "There's a scholarship fund at your school," he said, changing subjects abruptly. "Your teachers should be contacting your mother about it this week." The implication was clear even to a 9-year-old. Another door being opened, another burden being quietly lifted by invisible hands. Annie recognized the pattern now, understood the careful distance maintained in each act of assistance. "Why are you helping us?" she asked suddenly, the direct question bypassing caution in a moment of unguarded curiosity. The words hung between them, bold in their simplicity and profound in their implications. Gino's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in consideration, as if Annie's question had caught him unprepared. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his features before he regained his composure with practiced ease. "Because you paid for it," he answered finally, the simple response carrying layers of meaning between them. $5 bought something no one else has ever purchased from me. My word to a child who needed help. Annie absorbed this, her young mind understanding the deeper implication, that their connection had somehow transcended the normal transactions of his world. She nodded once, mirroring his own economical gesture of acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of all she couldn't articulate. Gratitude for her mother's health, for safety, for doors opening where walls had stood before. No elaborate speech could have conveyed more than those 2 words offered without pretense. Gino inclined his head slightly, accepting her thanks with the same seriousness he might accord a business associate. "You should go home now," he said, his tone gentler than his reputation would suggest possible. "Your mother will be waiting." The car pulled away smoothly, blending into afternoon traffic and disappearing around a corner while Annie remained on the sidewalk, watching long after it had gone. Something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of the world. Not all monsters were what they seemed, and help sometimes came from the most unexpected sources. That night, when Catherine excitedly shared news of the anonymous scholarship nomination from Annie's teachers, the girl accepted the miracle with practiced surprise. The pattern had become familiar now, blessings appearing with plausible explanations, their true source hidden behind layers of legitimate-seeming paperwork. Spring melted into summer, bringing more changes as Catherine's strength continued returning. A part-time position at the hospital's administrative office offered flexible hours and excellent benefits, arranged through Dr. Harrington's recommendation. The work suited her perfectly, providing purpose without overtaxing her still-recovering body. On rare occasions, Annie would spot the Blacktown car parked discreetly across from her school, or glimpse one of Gino's men, recognizable by their immaculate suits and alert eyes, watching from a distance. They never approached, never interfered, but their presence formed an invisible shield around the small family. Catherine began to bloom in ways Annie had never witnessed before, her smile appearing more frequently as pain receded and independence returned. She laughed now, a sound so rare in previous years that Annie's little sister had stared in wide-eyed wonder the first time she heard it. Small luxuries appeared in their lives, tickets to the botanical gardens left in their mailbox, a gift card to the bookstore on Annie's birthday, an invitation to a special hospital fundraising event where Catherine was recognized for her volunteer work with other MS patients. Each gift arrived with plausible explanation, never revealing the invisible hand guiding their good fortune. The neighborhood children who once avoided their apartment now played regularly with Annie and her sister, their parents no longer steering them away with whispered warnings about that family situation. The shadow of Warren's volatile presence had lifted completely, allowing normal childhood to finally take root. In July, when Catherine mentioned wishing she could take the girls to Disney World someday, 3 park passes arrived the following week through a community outreach program, selecting deserving families for complimentary vacations. The joy on her sister's face as she hugged her Mickey Mouse plush became Annie's most precious memory. At school, teachers noted the transformation in Annie's demeanor, the hypervigilance fading gradually as security replaced constant anxiety. Her grades, already strong from a child forced to grow up too quickly, improved further as energy previously spent on survival redirected toward learning and, occasionally, simply being a child. The world began to make sense in a new way, not as the arbitrary, cruel place where her uncle's rage could destroy everything without consequence, but as a complex ecosystem where even the most dangerous predators sometimes protected rather than hunted the vulnerable. The lesson shaped her understanding of power and its purposes. Sometimes at night, Annie would stand at her bedroom window overlooking the quiet street below, wondering if someone watched over them even then. The thought brought comfort, rather than fear, a reversal of everything she'd been taught about strangers and danger. When 4th grade began in September, Annie found herself placed in the advanced learning program, her uniform provided through district funding, along with a laptop for special projects. Her mother beamed with pride at the parent orientation, standing straight without the cane that had been her constant companion for years. During a fall festival at the school, Annie glimpsed Gino across the courtyard, watching her receive an academic award, with the same intensity he'd shown in the park months earlier. Their eyes met briefly, his slight nod conveying approval, before he disappeared into the crowd, his presence unnoticed by anyone else. October arrived with cooling breezes and the 1-year anniversary of Catherine's participation in the medical trial. Her doctors marveled at her progress, declaring her case study material for a groundbreaking paper on new treatment protocols, another layer of legitimacy added to the narrative crafted around their changing fortunes. The phantom pains that had once kept Catherine bedridden now appeared only rarely, allowing her to advance to full-time work at the hospital. Her confidence grew alongside her physical capabilities, transforming her from a victim of circumstance into a woman reclaiming her power one day at a time. "Mom, can we invite Grandma for Thanksgiving this year?" Annie asked one evening as they prepared dinner together. Another normal activity that had once been impossible with Catherine's trembling hands. The question represented more than a holiday plan. It was about reconnecting with family that Warren had systematically isolated them from. Catherine paused, surprise giving way to thoughtful consideration. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she replied finally, her smile carrying the weight of reclaimed possibilities. "I'll call her this weekend." Bridges once burned began rebuilding as Catherine cautiously reconnected with friends and family who had drifted away during Warren's reign of isolation. Each renewed relationship strengthened the foundation of their new life, creating networks of support beyond the invisible protection Gino had established. Annie's little sister, no longer the frightened toddler who hid in closets when heavy footsteps approached, blossomed into a cheerful kindergartner with a passion for painting. Her artwork covered their refrigerator, bright colors and smiling figures that told the story of their transformation better than words ever could. The apartment that had once felt like a prison now buzzed with the energy of healing and growth. Friends visited for dinner, neighbors stopped to chat in the hallway, and the constant undercurrent of fear that had once permeated every moment gradually dissolved into memory rather than lived experience. On a crisp November afternoon, as Annie walked home from debate club practice, the now familiar black car appeared beside her. This time, the rear door opened in clear invitation, Gino's expressionless face visible in the shadowed interior. After a moment's hesitation, Annie slid into the leather seat, backpack clutched on her lap, as the door closed silently behind her. The car moved smoothly into traffic, creating a private bubble where time seemed suspended between past and present. "Your mother's doctors report excellent progress," Gino stated, breaking the silence with his characteristic directness. "The treatment is working better than expected." The information confirmed what Annie already knew, but revealed something more important. He was still monitoring their situation personally. Annie nodded, more comfortable in his presence now, though still aware of the unusual nature of their connection. "She's talking about going back to college next year," she offered, sharing this precious dream as proof of how far they'd come. To finish her nursing degree. Something like approval flickered across Gino's features, quickly masked behind his usual reserve. "Education is important," he said simply, the banal statement carrying the weight of endorsement from a man whose opinion had reshaped their world. They rode in comfortable silence for several blocks before he spoke again, his tone casual yet carefully measured. "There's a house becoming available near your school. 3 bedrooms, small yard, good neighborhood. Your mother might want to inquire about the rental listing next week." Annie recognized the familiar pattern. Opportunity presented as coincidence, help offered with plausible deniability. The subtle orchestration of their improving circumstances continued with the same attention to detail that had characterized every intervention since that first day in the park. "Why do you still help us?" she asked, the question direct in the way only children can manage. A year had passed since their initial transaction, far longer than any reasonable obligation would demand, especially from a man with his resources and responsibilities. Gino considered her question with genuine reflection, his gaze fixed on some middle distance beyond the car window. When he finally answered, His voice carried an authenticity rarely revealed to anyone in his world. Because watching your family heal reminds me that some things can be fixed. The simple admission revealed more about the man than perhaps he intended. That beneath the calculated exterior and fearsome reputation lived someone who recognized the value of restoration. In his world of power and consequences, their small family represented something precious, proof of positive change. "Will you keep watching over us forever?" Annie asked, the question simultaneously childish in its scope and profound in its implications. She had come to understand the protection surrounding them, invisible but ever present in the background of their recovering lives. Gino's lips curved in the ghost of a smile, the expression transforming his severe features momentarily. "Not forever," he answered honestly, "but until it's no longer necessary. Some investments deserve protection." By December, Catherine's application for the nursing program had been accepted with a merit scholarship covering tuition and books. The letter arrived on crisp university letterhead, bearing the signature of the dean, and congratulations for her exceptional personal essay about overcoming adversity. The move to the house Gino had mentioned happened seamlessly, the rental price mysteriously below market rate due to the owner's preference for long-term responsible tenants. Light flooded through windows that faced a small backyard where Annie's sister could play safely within the privacy of a wooden fence. Christmas approached with a joy previously unknown in their household. A real tree decorated with ornaments Catherine pulled from storage boxes long untouched, presents wrapped in colorful paper piled underneath, and homemade cookies filling the kitchen with cinnamon and vanilla scents that erased darker memories. "Mom, do you ever wonder about Uncle Warren?" Annie's sister asked innocently one evening as they hung stockings on the mantel. The question froze Catherine momentarily before she recovered, kneeling to meet her younger daughter's curious gaze. "Sometimes," she answered carefully, honesty tempered with age-appropriate truth, "but mostly I'm grateful for our life now." The simple statement encompassed years of suffering and relief without dwelling in either, a testimony to Catherine's own healing beyond the physical. Annie remained silent during this exchange, her knowledge a burden she carried alone yet without regret. The weight of her decision that day in the park had matured her beyond her years, but watching her family thrive made any price worth paying. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks burst over Sarasota Bay, Annie stood on their front porch watching colors bloom across the night sky. A familiar black car rolled slowly down their street, pausing briefly opposite their house before continuing onward, a silent acknowledgement of endings and beginnings. The spring semester brought Catherine's return to academia, her schedule carefully balanced between classes, work, and family time. The determination in her eyes as she studied late into the night reminded Annie of the strength that had always existed beneath the pain and medication-induced fog. A letter arrived in March, addressed formally to Miss Annie Brooks, the envelope heavy cream stock that spoke of importance before it was even opened. Inside lay an invitation to apply for a prestigious private school scholarship program for exceptional students showing remarkable potential. Catherine marveled at the opportunity, while Annie recognized the familiar handwriting in the signature, though the name belonged to the school's admissions director. The pattern continued, doors opening through seemingly legitimate channels, their benefactor's influence invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. The acceptance letter came 3 weeks later, along with details about the uniform requirements, book list, and orientation schedule. That evening, after Catherine had called relatives to share the exciting news, Annie slipped away to her bedroom window and looked out at the quiet street below. As if summoned by her thoughts, Gino's car appeared at the corner, moving slowly past their house in what had become a familiar ritual of distant guardianship. This time, however, it stopped directly in front, the rear door opening in clear invitation. Annie glanced toward the living room where her mother and sister were laughing over a board game, then quietly slipped out the front door. The night air carried the scent of jasmine as she approached the waiting vehicle with confident steps, no longer the frightened child clutching $5 in a desperate gamble. "Congratulations on your acceptance," Gino said, when she settled into the seat beside him. No pretense of coincidence colored his statement. They had moved beyond such charades in the private space they occasionally shared. Annie nodded, accepting both the congratulations and the acknowledgement of his role in creating the opportunity. "Thank you," she said simply, the words encompassing far more than the school acceptance. Gratitude for everything their lives had become under his distant protection. Gino studied her face with that same intense scrutiny from their first meeting, though now he seemed to be measuring growth rather than desperation. "You're different," he observed, not unkindly. "Stronger." The assessment pleased her more than any conventional compliment could have. Recognition of resilience from someone who understood its true value. "My mom says we're all stronger now," she replied, sharing this piece of Catherine's wisdom as a gift he might appreciate. Something softened in Gino's expression, a rare glimpse beneath the armor he presented to the world. "Your mother is a remarkable woman," he acknowledged, respect evident in his tone. "She's built something important from difficult circumstances." Annie recognized the deeper message in his words, that while he had removed obstacles and provided opportunities, Catherine's determination had transformed potential into reality. The distinction mattered, preserving her mother's agency in their story of recovery. "Will I see you again after I start the new school?" she asked directly, curious about the parameters of their unusual connection now that life had stabilized. The question acknowledged the evolutionary nature of their arrangement, from desperate plea to something neither could easily define. Gino considered this with genuine reflection, his answer careful and honest. "Less often, perhaps, but I'll be watching your progress." The statement carried no threat, only the assurance of continued interest in her development, something between mentorship and distant guardianship. As Annie prepared to return inside, Gino reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "For your 10th birthday next week," he explained, placing it in her palm with uncharacteristic hesitation, a reminder that some investments pay unexpected dividends. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet bearing a single charm, a tiny key with a diamond chip catching the streetlight. The symbolism wasn't lost on Annie. Keys opened doors, created possibilities, represented freedom from locks that once confined. "Remember that your future is yours to build now," Gino said quietly as she admired the gift. "My part was simply removing what stood in your way." The humble assessment of his role revealed a wisdom Annie would only fully appreciate years later. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of courage and unexpected protection. If this story touched your heart, please share in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that help sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Your support keeps these stories coming.
И этому человеку нужны, по сути, и дав ему, вот тут интересно, и дав ему в моменте огромное количество денег, останется ли он таким же? Либо это все поменяет его. Или у бедного, к примеру, или у богатого, забери все деньги, сможет ли он найти себе друзей, там, хорошую жену, стать там, не знаю, хорошим отцом? Ну, вот такие вот интересные вопросы на самом деле. И, наверное, вот для бедных людей тоже, как бедных, я имею в виду финансово, которые, зависимые финансово сильно. Богатые — это независимые финансово. Да, им пофигу вообще, там, что сколько стоит, не считают ни копейки. И вот бедный человек, что может держать его в морально нормальном состоянии? Это, наверное, возможно, поддержка семьи, поддержка друзей. Ну, как я и говорил, к примеру, как у меня есть сосед, вот у него есть поддержка родителей, да, поддержка друзей. Но он не вылазит из ситуации, в той, в которую залез. И получается, что у нас получается? Что это тоже не важно? Что даже имея поддержку своих родственников, друзей, ты не вылезешь из дизморали, из такого образа жизни? Получается, нет. Так что же тогда? Алло.
Алло, Андрей.
Ау.
Ты еще не заезжал?
Вот я еду, сейчас заеду скоро.
Не едь туда, все, оплата пришла.
Все, хорошо, давай. Вот, как я и говорю, можно... Так что же для человека самое главное получается? Чтобы держаться на плаву. Многих же не останавливают, дети не останавливают, да, которые имеются. Да, любовь к детям тоже их не останавливает. Да, как-то поддержка, наверное, вот если так разобраться, наверное, самое внутреннее, наверное, если вот так вот разобраться, прям вот углубиться, возможно, поддержка жены, типа, или девушки, если прям вот глубоко внутрь копнуть, тоже на самом деле не всегда. Но если у тебя есть девушка и жена, ты на ежедневной основе с ней общаешься, с ней видишься. Это единственный человек, по сути, да, который, наверное, важен в твоей жизни, который может дать отдельный типа совет. И почему же тогда люди, наверное, разводятся, расходятся, разъезжаются, перестают быть вместе, раз это так важно? Наверное, из-за того, что вот нету вот этого как раз таки, наверное, какого-то отдельного совета, какой-то внутреннего чувства нужности этому человеку. Да, люди расходятся, потому что ты не получаешь каких-то тех чувств, которых ты нигде не больше не получишь. Не можешь получить. Ни за деньги, ни еще как-либо. И когда у тебя, наверное, нету этого чувства внутреннего, люди, наверное, потом расходятся. И потом люди, многие, наверное, попадают вот в эти депрессии. Помимо финансовых проблем, нереализованности, да, и еще семейные неудачи какие-то добавляются. Наверное, это было всегда у людей. Просто раньше, наверное, этому не придавали такой огласки, возможно. Да и раньше было чуть, наверное, возможно, проще. Я говорю, человеку надо было всего лишь выполнять свои функции какие-то. Да? Как бы человек мог сходить там, отработать, к примеру, на заводе, прийти, и он был спокоен уже. Что все, типа, он сделал все, что от него требуется. В наше же время ты этого не можешь сделать. И получается, помимо того, что ну вот оно от этого-то и все исходит на самом деле. Семьи от этого-то и рушатся. Да, от того, что когда ты понимаешь о том, что твоя нереализация в жизни, понятно, что это твоя вина, да, какая-то в чем-то, что ты не смог себя найти. И помимо этого, если у тебя еще нет какой-то внутренней поддержки в твоей семье, то как бы это все и приводит к тому, что люди расходятся. И оба, наверное, остаются в какой-то такой дизморали оба. Да, в какой-то, наверное, все равно внутренней депрессии. Короче, и как же избежать этого всего, наверное, главный вопрос. Тут, наверное, несколько вариантов. В наше время, наверное, это наверное, не опускать руки никогда, в первую очередь. Если бы взять со стороны мужчины, да, то в наше время, наверное, главное не то, типа, сколько он зарабатывает, а главное, чтобы, наверное, не опускать руки. Потому что работа примерно плюс-минус вся одинаковая. Плюс-минус везде она одинаково оплачивается. Да, но хотеть и стараться чего-то большего и не опускать руки, наверное, это одно из самых главных. вещей. Да, стараться и хотеть чего-то большего. И тут вступает, наверное, вот это вот как раз таки еще и семейная поддержка, да, любовь, нежность, да, какая-то, поддержка словесная. И это, наверное, все сохраняет в тебе мотивацию к стремлению, к жизни, к желанию добиться чего-то большего. Можно не хотеть ничего на самом деле, да, устроиться в какую-то организацию, зарабатывать 100 тысяч рублей, но тебе этих денег явно не будет хватать. И в оконцове ты опять-таки поймаешь, наверное, эту дезмораль. Потому что все оно по кругу крутится. И потом люди на СВО уходят, умирают за 5-7 миллионов рублей. И я не думаю, что это кого-то осчастливит. Ну, во всяком случае, данного человека точно это не осчастливит. Говоря именно о поддержке, что значит поддержка? Как она выглядит, поддержка эта семейная? Наверное, у каждого это, наверное, по-разному немного. В любом случае, каждому человеку нужны какие-то разные вещи от другого человека. Да? Всегда же отношения — это взаимный обмен чем-то. Да? И когда люди от друг друга этот взаимный обмен получают, будь то, это могут быть разные вещи.